Anna, welcome back.
Thanks for having me again.
We were just talking how it's actually been an entire year since we last spoke, which is kind of scary because that's gone really quickly. So here we are,
It's gone
a
so
year
fast.
later. A
A
year
year
later.
later.
And we're just going to pick up really where we stopped last year. So Anna was telling me about her first season gravel racing. So being a cyclist a long time, she thought, okay, I'm gonna do some racing, see how I got on. Loved it. You can listen to this previous episode to hear all about that. And then we're just gonna pick up from then. Kind of off season is generally November, and people start up training again ahead of the next year, which is obviously the 2024 season. Then Anna, talk me through kind of what happened then, what your year's been like.
Yeah. Well, it has not been boring, that's for sure. So when we left off, I had just kind of started into my, or I was coming, I was coming up to the end of my off season sort of, and I had just started picking up riding again. Um, And what happened after that is I got a new coach and I started working with them, and I did a lot of riding during the winter and I loved it. We kind of went head on into it, and I started working with a new bike sponsor. So I packed up my new bike and I went to Canada where I started my training for this season, which is kind of funny because not a lot of people head to Canada for their training in the winter.
Not known for
No,
its heat.
absolutely not. It was a lot of cold outdoor rides. And then I luckily had a trainer at home, so I'd balance long outdoor rides and short indoor sessions. And that sort of kicked off my season. I went to LA with a group of friends over New Year's, and we did a big block of just long, easy rides. And then shortly after that, I was back to Europe and started racing pretty soon. So I joined Pause Racing last year, and we kicked off our team at Santa Vai in Girona. So we had a little team camp there, and we kicked the season off with a race. It went surprisingly well. I was a little hesitant because it was so early in the season. It was a race in February. I was not confident at all with where I was at with my level, but I guess no one was. Everyone was. It was very early for everyone, so we were all in the same boat. And we had this really fun 3-day stage race, which was awesome. And I came out feeling really confident in that, in my form. And then from then on, the season kind of started. So I did quite a few races. I did a UCI race in Austria and then the Trecca, and then came over to the US, did Rule of Three, which was super fun and out of my comfort zone because it includes a lot of single track, but it was awesome. Save the 7 flats I had in it, but it was
Oh,
more race just to do for fun.
7 flats. Ooh la
7
la.
flats.
That's
Yeah.
quite a good
Yeah.
number. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I do remember all of them, and it was a good lesson in choosing the correct tires for your terrain and maybe choosing some better lines. But it was a very fun time, and then it was off to Unbound. Had a super fun Unbound. Did all right. Definitely not as well as I'd hoped to do, but
So
I
where are
had
we now? Where are we in the year now?
yeah, we're in June.
We're in June.
Yeah, so I'd gotten to June. I'd done a little stint of heat training in Austin, Texas before that, between Rule of Three and Unbound. So yeah, that was all going great. Got to Unbound feeling pretty fit, and I completed the race, and then I got sick for 2 weeks. Like fever, cough, sore throat, the works. Um, and
Yeah.
that was also my season ender, which I didn't know at the time, but yeah, that was the
Yeah.
last race.
So quite an interesting year. You really hit out strong, and then yeah,
Yeah,
hit it all the way until June, and then it all just kind of unfurled for you. And that is the thing with sport, isn't it? You know, we talked about it last year, the beauty of sport, but the pain of sport as well, and it can really up its levels again. I just kind of wanted to talk to you, I guess, about your season because it's a lot, you know, you can have a lot of conversations when someone's had the best season ever, and that's kind of a great conversation to have with people.
Yeah,
But also it's not representative necessarily of sport as a whole because it's
definitely not.
painful. I know, it's painful. But then also this is the real side of it. Getting sick, ending the season early, and you put all the work into it and it just hasn't played out the way that was. And then you kind of said that you realized then in hindsight that that was the end of your season because it wasn't something obvious like you've broken your collarbone and you're out.
Mhm.
So what kind of happened there after Unbound?
Yeah. So Unbound, I think, was just kind of the last grain of sand that tipped the scales of, I guess, a longer going issue that has been building up over the past 2 years. So essentially, what ended my season this year was a bout of overtraining. Um, and the getting sick was just a symptom of that because I noticed over the course of the season I was just getting sick over and over and over again, quite often after bigger blocks of building up to races. So a lot of times I would have to race already feeling like something was coming on. Um, and yeah, so the really it's just been it's been a long time coming, but um I didn't expect it to hit as hard as it did. Um so after Unbound, I was on the couch for 2 weeks with my fever and my cough and my sore throat, and then I started feeling a little bit better and went out to slowly ride my bike again while talking to my coach. And I realized that I there was absolutely nothing. There was nothing left. I had no energy. And so I was like, okay, today's not the day. And then I try again 2 days later. Still wouldn't work. I'd still be exhausted. I'd head out and pedal my bike, and I felt like I was in the middle of the worst bonk of my life. Like my legs had no energy. My lungs felt like they were imploding. I just felt so exhausted. So I decided to take a little bit longer off the bike. I was planned to stay in Canada until mid June. I had another race planned there, which I had to cancel, unfortunately. And then I flew back to Europe and thought, okay, I'll start riding my bike again here. And then I got to Europe and I got sick again. Um, and then I waited another 2 weeks until all my symptoms cleared up. Um, and then I wanted to slowly start building my riding again, and it was the same thing. It was this utter exhaustion, this really deep, deep, deep exhaustion that set in anytime I wanted to do anything physical. And it got to a point where it got so bad that like my day to day was completely impacted by it as well. I couldn't walk, I couldn't stand for longer times. Absolutely no chance of walking upstairs. I was, I all I could do was lay horizontal, really. Yeah, and that was quite tough. And that lasted for quite a while.
It's a
And
very
I thought,
cruel injury, isn't it? It's not
yeah,
something, yeah, it's not something obvious that you know about and you know how to deal with it and you can kind of it's that invisible thing where
mm-hmm,
it's all about how you're feeling. And the worst part is it's because you've worked so hard. You've worked too hard. You've put
yeah,
too much into it. It's kind
yeah,
of cruel on so many levels. And it wasn't a straightforward path for you to identify either, because again, it's not something obvious like you've broken something or you're ill in a certain way that, you know, you get antibiotics or whatever. So what was that kind of journey of, hold on, you're realizing I'm not feeling great. I have no energy, zero energy. I'm super, super fit. I have been training all year and yet I've got nothing. What
yeah.
was that journey like?
Yeah, you're right. It is this very confusing state to be in because it's not an obvious thing. I at first my the first thing I did was I went to go see my GP, and we just ran all the tests. We did blood work, we did a COVID test, we did things like that to check some major illnesses, mono, like Epstein Barr, which I've heard about before, and I started panicking that it might be that. It wasn't that, and so everywhere we checked, we got no answer. Um, And I started getting really frustrated because on paper, I looked healthy to my GP. And this is the important part. To my GP, I looked healthy. And so I got really disheartened by that and thought, oh gosh, maybe it's all in my head at this point. Maybe because I've taken a few weeks off the bike now, I've lost it. I don't know, maybe I lost the motivation, something like that. And I started questioning myself, which was quite tough. Um, Also, I was out of my routine. I was out of my training routine. And just having that big chunk of what's made up the last 4 years of my life missing was super hard to deal with mentally. So I started questioning myself and I started thinking maybe it's all in my head. Um, and that bummed me out. I'm not going to lie. And through talking to a lot of people about my predicament, I kind of started getting onto a path. And one of my friends suggested I go see a sports doctor or a sports specialist. And so I ended up doing that, and going to see them helped a lot. I brought all of my medical history. I've been doing blood work over the past couple of years, like twice a year, to monitor my iron levels. So I took all of that with me to go see this specialist, and he reviewed everything, and he was able to see trends that my GP would never have looked at. He looked at my hormones. And he diagnosed me with overtraining. He told me that my body had been in a catabolic state, and that my hormones were completely out of whack and not where they were supposed to be. And he said this is not at all what it should be like for an athlete. And he told me that I was going to need about 2 to 6 months probably to recover from this. And that would require a lot of patience and a lot of very, very, very slow, um, easy riding or anything to re enter it again.
And do you actually know what caused it? And I mean by that, was it lack of rest or too much training, or what actually is, I guess, the definition of overtraining? Because on the basic level, we all know what that means, but it's such a severe effect that it has. It's not that you're tired because you've had a big week of training. It's very
Yeah.
deep rooted, if you know what
It's
I mean.
deep rooted. It builds up over time. I think there's also a difference between overreaching and overtraining. Overreaching is when you go hard for a week and then you're tired. That makes sense. Overtraining, I think, is the just accumulated effect, in my case, of not adequately fueling myself and not adequately resting, which I thought I had an okay handle on over these past years as I've slowly been learning how to fuel myself. But the real issue was that I had built up such a deficit before I had started seriously training and racing that I just kept pushing ahead of me. And this was a fueling deficit. And then I added on top, once I started racing, I started the rest deficit, I suppose. I was traveling a lot, I was working, I was racing, and there wasn't much room for anything other than travel, race, and work. Um, and I just didn't have enough time to really get in my solid 8 hours of sleep, and I didn't have any off time. And I think that over the years just added up to my body saying, okay, no, that's enough.
It's funny the sleep one, isn't it? Because if you're scheduled in to do a 4 hour ride, you'll get the 4 hour ride done. But if you're scheduled in to do an 8 hour sleep, you're
Yes.
thinking, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to cut that off and whatever. And I remember hearing a quote, and it's you shouldn't set your alarm to wake up. You should set your alarm to go to bed, because
Yes.
then you will wake up at that time because you've
Yeah.
got that amount of sleep. Whereas if you go to bed instead of 10:30, you go to bed at 12:30, you're not going to wake up on time. You're going to have that deficit of 2 hours, and you're
Mm-hmm.
probably not going to have that 2 hour flexibility on the other side of your morning to sleep in and make that up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Exactly.
just funny how we view sleep. It's like
Mm-hmm.
training, rest day is part of your training, so you should
Mm-hmm.
take it seriously. And it's like, well, yeah, but I also need to clean my kitchen. I
Exactly.
also need to fly to America, or I also need to do some work, or all of
Mm-hmm.
these things. And it is just that, how do you actually balance all of these plates that are flying at once? And then you somehow manage to balance it, and then you're like, oh dang, I forgot the rest thing. Do you know, it's just
Yeah.
not very fair if you kind
It's
of
not
think
very
about that.
fair at all. And the thing is, like it absolutely works for a while. You can balance all those plates for an amount of time. Um, and because it works for a while, then it kicks in your head like, oh, okay, because it worked then, it should work now. And that's the difficulty I had. Is like I knew I was able to do this for a certain amount of time. And once I noticed it wasn't working anymore, once I noticed that I started getting tired, I fought back against that. I didn't listen to my body telling me it was getting tired. I was like, if I just stick with it for long enough, my body will catch up to me and it will adjust to this new routine. Um, and that's, I think, the most damaging thing you can do is to fight back against what your body is actually telling you. And I did that for too long.
Does it make sense in retrospect, or are you thinking like, did it make sense at the time and you thought, okay, yeah, I knew I actually been running away from this, or has it been a bit of stepping back, processing it, and going, actually, I can understand that now?
Unfortunately, it did feel like something that made a lot of sense. I had felt it, but I didn't want to really admit it to myself, I think, because I just thought, hey, I'm working with a coach now. I should be fine. Reality of it is the coach only knows as much as you tell them, right? And if you tell them that you're feeling fine and you're managing the training, then they're going to believe that. Um, yeah, so it made a lot of sense to me, and it almost felt like a relief once I heard the diagnosis because I had just been running on empty for so long. It felt good to have someone external say, "Stop for a second, rest."
And you also alluded to the fact that it was not just the physical, okay, your body's actually physically tired, it needs this break, but it's that mental side of it as well.
Yeah.
And, what were your thoughts on cycling? Did you still have that motivation, have that excitement to ride your bike, or what was the toll that it had taken on you mentally by this point?
Yeah, I think the mental side was just as tough as the physical side. Because I had been running over myself for so long, the motivation to ride also started diminishing. And that was really, really tough because riding for me was always my happy place. And so once I noticed that motivation start to dwindle, instead of taking a step back, I pushed harder into it and thought I would snap back into it if I just kept things the way they were and stuck to my routine. Um, and so accepting that I needed the rest and that I needed to take a break was super difficult because it had become such an integral part of my week, my day. Yeah, it just being out of your routine was hard to deal with. Having your It was kind of my balance to my work. Having that gone and not finding, I didn't find a replacement for it right away. So I just kind of left that vacancy. There was a gap that cycling would fill. And to have that spot empty in my day was difficult. At first, it was all right because I was just so tired and all I wanted to do was sleep. But then after a while, this uneasiness started settling in of, okay, now what? What do I do with the time?
Yeah, there's a the benefit of exercise, and people kind of encourage people to exercise because you have all of these endorphins, you get outside, you meet people, you can enjoy nature and feeling stronger and faster. But then the flip side of it is when you stop that, you really miss that. And one of my husband's relatives, he's really into his running, and if they're on holiday with he's got some small kids, and if they're on holiday, he'll still make time to go out and run.
Mhm.
And you're like, oh wow, you must love running. He's like, I'm just a nicer person after I've run. That is it. And it is
Yeah.
that as simple as that, because sometimes if you feel out of sorts, it's kind of a go-to thing. If you're someone who enjoys sport, it's the go-to, it's the routine, it's who you are, it's what you like to do. So
Mhm.
immediately to have that taken away from you, I always think that it's mentally even more challenging than the physical side of it, because you're sitting there, you have all of this time as well suddenly in your hands to think about it, to process it, to miss it, to grieve it, I guess, as
Mhm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
And also the waiting, the patience of that. And people generally, they have there's an issue with rest in the athletic realm.
Yeah.
There's a big issue that no one's really solved apart from kind of get through rest days.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always been this big thing about resting, how to rest, how best to rest, when to rest, how much to rest. And to have all of your sport being taken away and having to rest is quite terrifying for anybody. And I imagine you also found that really, really daunting. So how did you actually apply that? Like, what does that look like in terms of recovery from overtraining? Because is it as simple as just resting?
Yeah, well, at the beginning, I think I didn't really know what to do with my time. So it was as simple as resting. It really was just I think I was getting on average 10 hours of sleep. I'd make a point to get to bed really early and wake up when I had to. So really, it was a big focus on getting a good, long sleep routine in. And luckily, my schedule allowed that with all the free time that I wasn't spending on the bike. And then I applied at first an almost training way to approach to my rest. So the doctors had told me that I was allowed to do like half an hour of easy spinning, like really easy, like soft pedaling, or half an hour of walking. So I was just really strict about my walking. I would get in a good half an hour to an hour walk every day, often before work when it allowed it, or after work. So I got really into walking. That was great. And then I started looking at other bits of my life that I could improve to start working towards building a good base and a good routine once I did start training again. So I started looking at things like my morning routines. And so I got better about waking up, having food, and then having coffee, for example. So I started tweaking little things that will hopefully down the road, once I start training again, bring me some benefits. I also made a point to connect with off-bike friends and start spending time with them that I would otherwise have been on the bike, which was really good. So yeah, lots of talking to people that also that was also great. So focus on the easy small things that I did have control over, because I didn't have much control over how I felt.
Yeah. Very interesting. The morning routine examination sounds quite a fun look at it. And I love how you say, you approached your resting as though it was training, because also, you laugh at that. But it's doing what you actually know. And I don't think there's any shame in that. It actually makes so much more sense. And if someone has a routine that they really like and they want to swap that out, you can just use them. Like, how does your brain work? What is the easiest way of doing it? And you can kind of do that in that way. And I think that it's actually quite clever of how to do that, which it's funny how you mentioned it. And you also mentioned it in an article that you did with one of your sponsors about the weight loss aspect of training, and how you kind of mentioned how it's painful to compare yourself to other people, which again in sport is a huge thing, but it's even more painful to compare yourself to a different version of you, especially
Mm-hmm.
if you're doing it in a critical way of where you are now.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously using yourself as a reference point is fine. It can be encouraging, or it can just kind of kick you into motion. But using it as a comparison is
Mm-hmm.
where it actually becomes a line that gets a bit too crossed. Is kind of how you were describing it.
Mm-hmm.
How was that part of the training? I mean, in sport in general, for men and for women, it's talked about a lot in women's sport, but it's very prevalent in men's sport as well. Weight, especially when you're on a bike or you're doing cardio in general, but on a bike, it's so much about weight. Like, these bikes are weighed everything within an inch of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, the rider, of course, will examine themselves. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
huge thing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
What was that kind of experience, or like how did that lead into your overtraining? You did mention the underfueling as well as, but
Mm-hmm.
how did that all link together?
Yeah, I think this is one of the hardest things to talk about, and also a very big contributor to a lot of what has played out over the past year. Because I had accidentally gotten to a really light weight a couple years back, and I briefly saw my performance really. Like I was going really good uphill, and I loved the feeling of feeling strong and fast and light uphill. And taking that feeling I had on the bike, I made a correlation between what I was eating and how I was feeling on the bike, and that quickly spiraled to a very unhealthy pattern. Um, and I think that is what contributed to the first energy deficit that I had a couple years back. Once I noticed that there were some really unhealthy signs in the way I was living my life, with my relationship with food, how my body was reacting. I lost my period for a while. That's when alarm bells started going off, and I realized, oh, okay, wait, maybe this is not right. And then I decided to change my habits. I found a couple female runners that had spoken out on their issue and were talking about fueling and how important it is. And so I decided to make a change. I started fueling, but because my body had been in such a mode of starvation for quite a while, I quickly put on a lot of weight again. And the months where I was putting on weight were also the months that I had committed to a racing team. And so I started my racing season at a weight and that I just wasn't comfortable in. I didn't feel like myself. And so I spent the entire season on the daily thinking about this weight I had put on and how it was slowing me down and how I needed to lose it during the season. And looking back now, I realize that was very damaging thinking. But at the moment, I was so fixated on having to lose this weight in order to be a good athlete. And that did so much damage because it was the whole year I was racing, I was focused on trying to lose this weight. And I had a really hard time with that. I tried working through it on my own. I was not really informed. I didn't consult a nutritionist. And so I would constantly bounce between too much, too little fueling because I didn't know what I was doing. And I put a lot of pressure on myself. And when the weight wasn't coming off, I was very disappointed in myself. And that would transfer onto my feeling on the bike and on race day. And so spending now almost 2 years in that kind of mindset, I think I wish I would have worked with a nutritionist sooner. I wish I would have talked about it sooner because the way I was talking to myself, I think, was really setting me back in my training and in my racing. So
yeah, that the inner dialogue with ourselves has actually so much significance, positively or also detrimentally. And it's something that I think everybody needs to examine. Actually, how are we speaking to ourselves? Because
Mhm.
if our friends spoke to us in a way that we sometimes speak to ourselves, or if we spoke to our friends in the way that sometimes we speak to ourselves, I think that, we'd be absolutely, it would be shocking, and I know that for myself, I'm very prone to beating myself up. You've just spoken about you and the pressure that you put on yourself when you're performing and doing so much, your body is doing so much sport, and it's so easy to, I guess, look in hindsight and identify that.
Mhm.
But just looking in the present tense as well, I think everybody, we're supposed to, it's so cheesy, like we're supposed to be like our own best friends
Mhm.
and look out for ourselves, and oh my goodness, like just be thankful that we are young and healthy, or if we're older that we've survived all of these years, and I think it's just that moment of appreciation for who we are and what we have and what our body's doing. And it's so easy to just spiral down this negativity. And
Mhm.
I'm not just talking about sport and performance sport. I think everybody who's listening to this will know exactly the kind of inner dialogue that we don't even voice a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And we'd be shocked if we did. I'm sure some of the things just like that. And then you kind of mention, like, I guess when you get to the start line, you're completely exhausted. Never mind the physical side of it. But
Mhm.
just mentally, you've been battling from one side to the other side, to then beating
Mhm.
yourself up, to then worrying, I imagine, as well. And anxiety will play a huge,
Yeah.
huge part in that, probably impacting your sleep as
Mhm.
well, which then will impact recovery. And it is just this whole thing that is very much a side of sport that's been talked about more, but definitely something that shouldn't be underestimated, the mental
Absolutely.
side.
Yeah. I was not when I started this sport, I was so green. Um I didn't know that these were things that I would have to be dealing with down the road. I never would have pictured I'd be in this type of scenario. If you had told me that one day I would not be excited to go ride my bike because I was worried about my weight or the way that I would be slow uphill, I wouldn't have believed you. But it's these little choices you make. It's these little things that you choose to override that your body is telling you that add up over time, and then suddenly you find yourself in a position that you never would have expected yourself to be, and then you have to pull the handbrake hard and really look at what you're doing and be like, okay, why am I really in this sport? What do I really want to achieve? And does it make sense to beat myself up about something that my body is doing to protect itself? I mean, the weight gain, for example, was its way of making sure that I stayed healthy. It was not, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you've completely got it right on the point there. You know, our bodies are protecting ourselves. When we get sick, it's because we're tired, we're more susceptible to any
Mhm.
germs or infections that are going about. I'm not a scientist, but you know, it's very much just the whole biology of it. When we yawn, it's because we're tired, so we need to sleep.
Yeah.
Because if we don't sleep, then we'll be more, prone to anything else that's going about, and we'll be less alert. Which I guess you can go back to, maybe we'll be more in danger of being attacked about all of these. If you go back to like ancient times, you can really just like scale it in any way, that it's just our body telling us all of these things. And it's not that you wake up one day and you say, oh my goodness, I do not want to ride my bike because I don't like it anymore, because then I think you'd have the alarm bells that are going in. It's not just that click switch one
Mhm.
day, it's like that. It is those tiny little bits, which I think
Mhm.
is why it's so important, I guess, to just sometimes stop and evaluate. Hold on, what did I just say to myself?
Yeah.
Like calling yourself out on it, as though it was your friend saying something to you, where you probably would say, hold on, I'm actually quite uncomfortable with you saying that about me. We can call ourselves out on it as well, but obviously it's not as easy as that. But that's an encouragement, I guess, to myself as much as anybody else, to just see, actually, hold on, why are we beating ourselves up for these things? And what were the sort of signs of overtraining? How does it manifest itself?
Um, well, the first being this, I had this tiredness that wouldn't go away. I noticed it in my training. I was exhausted a lot of the time. Um, I wasn't seeing a ton of progression in my training. I did at the beginning of the season, but eventually it just kind of plateaued. Um, I also I noticed this extreme muscle fatigue a lot of the time, regardless what I did. My muscles always felt really tired. Um, I also repeatedly got sick. And in the build up to this season, I every now and then had to take a few days off um, because I was super tired and I couldn't get through my intervals. I couldn't get on the bike and do much more than an easy spin. Um, and so these times I had to take off the bike just kept getting longer and longer. And I think that was a warning sign. But the very first warning sign, I think, was just how I felt about riding my bike. And that was, I noticed the motivation started to decrease, um, which was a very strange and new feeling to me at the time. And I think that was the first warning sign. Um, yeah.
And we're now a few months later, and you're back on the bike and you are riding again.
Yes.
Has that love come back, or how have you kind of rekindled that? Because I guess it's quite a delicate point then, because you're at a point where you're like, hold on, I don't like this, but I do want to like it, and I want to continue doing it. But how do you carefully kind of go about that, in like bringing it back into your life in that sustainable way?
Yeah, that's the hard part. And that's the part, if I'm being honest with you, I'm still wrapping my head around. Because I used to get an immense amount of joy from riding my bike. and from riding my bike fast and hard. And that's what I loved about it. I love being able to push myself. And the hard thing right now is I can't. I'm not allowed to push myself and go hard. So it's very much about finding the little bits of cycling that got me interested apart from the efforts. And so, be that riding with some good friends that also want to ride easy with you. I am trying to build my skills for gravel cycling. So that means riding single track and maybe more technical trails and focusing on really getting good at descending. So I'm trying to focus my energy on things like that are fun, that are not performance related, or not power related. But it's really tough because my approach to cycling right now looks a lot different than it did when I started, which was purely chasing getting faster and better by any means necessary. And I have just learned to be really, really, really honest with myself. So when I head out on a ride now, this is also what my doctor told me to do, is give myself 20 minutes at the beginning of a ride, pedal, stay under a certain heart rate zone, and see how you feel. And then, depending on how those 20 minutes go, decide if I want to go on a ride at all, or if I turn around and go home, or what type of ride I can do that day. If it's an easy ride, or maybe a ride where I don't know, do a little chase a friend up a hill for a couple seconds. Really, really, really short efforts, but nothing too intense. So I think the way I'm building it again is to just be really, really honest with myself. And if I'm tired, I'm tired. And that's okay. Then I won't ride my bike that day and I'll focus on doing something else.
So you're just, I guess, the listening to your body part of it. Do you find that you really are acutely tuned into your body compared to what you were before all of this, before June, when you kind of went into this deep dive of where is the source of it? How's the difference? Like, what level of contrast are we right now?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't listening to my body whatsoever when I went into this. I was overriding everything because I told myself it's all in my head. And so if I was tired, didn't matter. I went out and did it anyways because I thought that's what you had to do. Versus now, I am really, really, especially in this build up phase right now, I am so in tune with how I'm feeling and what is right for me in that moment, because I have no planned training right now. So right now I'm really just focusing on what feels good in the moment. And the good thing is it's slowly trending upwards, very, very slowly. But I do notice a difference in energy from this week to even just a few weeks ago. So that's really promising. And that's the exciting part, is to have something to kind of chew away at bit by bit.
And what would you say are the main lessons that you've learned over this past year?
Oh, well, as I think I've mentioned quite a few times on this call, is if your body is giving you some sort of warning signs, if you're tired, if you're losing motivation, if you keep getting repeatedly sick, or your muscles are constantly sore, and it's not from a lack of iron or something, listen to that. Don't override and ignore it, and just listen to what it's telling you. And it's much better to take one day off, or 2 days off if you need it, than having to take a few weeks or months off if you ignore those symptoms every day. So that's the biggest.
And what, looking ahead, are you finding the love for cycling again? Do you want to race again? What's your goals? Like, do you even know that, or are you just taking it week by week? How is that kind of planning out?
Well, I would love to say I'm taking it week by week, but at the same time, I still feel like I have such a bone to pick with racing. The idea that one day I'll be able to get back to my full potential is super exciting to me, and I've always loved, or in the short amount of time that I've been racing, but I've always loved racing. I just think it's very fun. I love the challenge of it. And so my plan absolutely is to get back into it, just very slowly and with no expectations as of right now. I just want to get back into racing, but take it how it comes.
Amazing. She will not be defeated. I love that. You're like, I'm not taking it week by week. I know what I'm aiming for. I know what I'm going. I don't know how long the road is, but I
Yes,
know
that's
not to
okay.
stop till I'm there.
Yeah, I've accepted that I don't know the length of the road, but I know the direction of the road.
Exactly. And I think, without going too philosophical, we're kind of all in the same thing, aren't we? Like no one knows the direction of the road. You can apply that to absolutely any part of life or life as it generally is in its fullness. And I think
Absolutely.
that's the beauty of it, isn't it? If we knew everything, then, if you knew, hold on, you're going to actually stop your season in June, you wouldn't have had such a great first 6 months of the year. We don't want to know all of these things. And that is the beauty but the pain of life. But you also then have the excitement again because you just know what you want to do, what potential you want to fulfill.
Exactly. Potential I want to fulfill with a different approach, but
Exactly.
absolutely.
Kinder words to yourself, but
Yeah.
better outcomes.
Oh, yes.
And if people want to follow you on this journey, where should they go?
Well, I think I'm most active on my Instagram account. It's just my name. And Strava, which right now is very low postage compared to a couple months ago, but that's where I will slowly be posting. You'll see the length of my rides and the intensity of my rides, and hopefully those will get increasingly longer and more intense as time goes on.
Amazing, exactly. And I'll link those below so people can check them out. And thank you, Anna, so much for coming on. It's been a delight to talk to you again a year later. And obviously, it's been a really difficult year for you. But your honesty, I think, has been something that it's so important, I guess, these conversations of talking about the bad times as well as the good times. And not necessarily just that it's a bad thing, but just when things don't work out the way that we intend them to. I think it's so important to have these conversations, but obviously they're not easy ones to have. So thank you so much for coming on and talking me all through that.
Well, thanks for having me.